Happy birthday to me. Oh, okay.
Good evening. It is 5:30, so we'll call the special meeting to order. Looking at the audience, I don't think we'll have to worry about cell phones tonight, but let's do stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
City Clerk Chris Reinhardt, would you take the roll, please?
Councilmember Rowe,
Here.
Councilmember Stevens,
Here.
Councilmember Myers,
Here.
Councilmember Burke, Councilmember Dalby,
Here.
Mayor Lazio.
Here. Need a motion for approval of tonight's agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay.
Councilmember Rowe,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember Myers,
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby.
Yes.
Is there anyone in the audience that wants to speak to any issue on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 1.
Authorizing the city administrator to solicit requests for proposals regarding fixed base operator FBO services for the airport. Recommendation: approve the city administrator to proceed with issuing RFPs related to FBO services for the Ottumwa Regional Airport in the city of Ottumwa.
Move the recommendations presented.
Second. Thank you. Any questions for Phil? Hearing none, take the roll.
Councilmember Rowe,
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens,
Yes.
Councilmember Myers,
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby.
Yes.
Work session to discuss financial ability for future fleet and capital improvements projects for the city of Ottumwa. Recommendation: open discussion.
Okay.
Move the recommendation as presented?
We don't need a
No,
vote.
I don't.
Yeah, we
need to.
don't.
I take it back.
Thank you. We're going to have an open discussion tonight, and I'd like to encourage everybody to participate, especially our department people and city staff. Council, you're always very good about this, but just give each other a chance to finish your thought before you start with your own comments. We'll just be very informal. So, Phil, do you want to set the stage for what we're doing?
Certainly. So this will be my first attempt with the city here as far as capital budgeting, and outlines some of the spending that goes into the full budget then as well. And so one of the things that when I was interviewing talked about some of the progress I'd made in the last community I was in was looking at kind of the big picture, the full amount of the capital improvements, projects, infrastructure, everything else that goes into the needs for the community as a whole. So you have the vehicles that are there, and Larry's going to kind of outline a little bit of what the fleet program has been. In addition to that, you've got facilities, whether it's looking at building a new facility or some major projects or improvements within that, roofs, HVAC systems, those things that could be real large dollar items. Other equipment that aren't considered vehicles, construction equipment, contractors equipment, those things. Technology, so you're talking about computers, servers, the radios, all of those things kind of fit under that communications technology aspect. You have general infrastructure, roads, bridges, stormwater, sewer, community development projects, economic development projects, and all those things go into the overall needs of what we need to be able to fund and finance. I don't want to get bogged down tonight in specific projects. We're going to fund this next year. We're not going to fund that next year. That's really going to come at a later date. Even with the fleet program, the staff has had an initial meeting talking about some of those requests and needs. The fleet committee will meet again in November to kind of finalize the recommendations. They'll come back to the council, and a lot of that is going to depend on the financing or funding that's available. That's really kind of what I wanted to focus on tonight, aside from hearing from staff members on capital needs and whatever else on the larger picture. What I wanted to look at was what is the council's appetite as far as some of the funding opportunities that are out there. We talked about the ability to reduce the levy and the impact on the taxpayers. The offset of that is we still have a number of capital needs and items that are out there. Vehicles alone, you're looking at several $1 million of assets. And so to replace those on a regular schedule, if you're going to do as a pay as you go, we're saving money up and purchasing it once we had those funds, similar to the way that program operates. That would be, several $100,000 every year we'd be setting aside and spending and setting aside and spending. That's just vehicles. Now you're looking at roads. I think we're spending about $2 to $4 million a year, or trying to. If you're looking at long-term, we could probably be spending 4 or 5 times that just to keep up with roads. If if money was no object, which obviously it is, that's where some of those challenges come in. So we have some opportunities. You got your road use tax. Debt service is one option outside of the pay-as-you-go. We have the ability as a community to levy a capital tax. Dollars levied specifically for capital infrastructure projects. Franchise fees has been mentioned in the past. That's something that we can look at as well. The lost is local option sales tax is going to be coming up in a few years. Some of those dollars may be able to be set aside for capital projects as well. So it's kind of just starting some of that narrative and seeing, what the appetite is here. The overall goal, again, is to reduce that tax levy, looking at offsetting some of that, but at the same time, the possibility of looking at increasing our debt service or what we have as capacity. The state law allows the city to, for general obligation debt, take 5% of the assessed value and have that outstanding as debt service. That is, I think by the last audit that was completed, was $49 million. So we could levy up to $49 million of debt service in the general fund. Now that's exclusive of the revenue bonds that are out there for, say, sewer projects or other things. So not saying we want, and I would never recommend going all the way out there, because you want to have some ability in case there's emergencies or other things, but we have that amount of capacity. So how far is the council willing to borrow for? That's going to help set the staff stage as far as what we can realistically recommend. I can tell you, we can come forward with probably about $30 million of capital projects and requests just in 1 year, trying to catch up from where we are in the
2018,
past.
it was $30 million.
Okay, well, there you go.
That's
And we could probably have another 30 million this next year. And but if we're only willing to go up to, say, 10 million for financing or funding that, then it's going to be a lot more work on the front side for staff, bringing you a realistic recommendation that you're able and willing to approve as a body versus something that is just never going to fly. And it would save everybody's time, I think, to know some of that up front. That was the real purpose for my end for trying to have this meeting tonight. So.
Okay, very good. So do you want to start with the fleet committee then and their
Are you ready?
their
Sure.
needs?
Okay, great.
I guess I was going to recap. We've had this once before as far as this PowerPoint presentation. I know I get the same type of questions, not only sometimes from the elected officials, but from a lot of the internal staff in particular, and even citizens. So I did put the PowerPoint up. I don't think I'll go through every one, but I do, for just the general public, like to kind of go through it again. If you could bring up the PowerPoint. I just want to, again, you guys have heard this once before, but I want to get it back out to the public. The committee was formed in 91. Was formed in 91. The real core purpose goes to what Phil was talking about on the finance. You want to be able to assure some sort of fiscal responsibility as far as the departments, to where you're not all of a sudden hit with multi-million-dollar replacements and you haven't planned financially or through your maintenance program. So again, that's a very important aspect that gets lost many times in the discussion, that not only do we go through each piece of equipment, evaluate it, look at what we think the longevity is when we purchase it, as far as how many years of service is it going to be. One of the things that I want to point out, and I'm not really going to follow the PowerPoint detail for detail, we have stuff that ranges from a 6-year replacement schedule clear up to 25-year replacement schedule, depending on the type of equipment. Is it a heavy piece? How much is it used throughout the year? Of course, a lot of stuff comes in. Can you still get parts for it when you start reaching out 25 years? We do actually have a Champion Grader, for instance, where we have it programmed out. It's 35 years. So depending on, again, the use, durability of the type of equipment, it might be it was originally put on a 20-year schedule. We're 15 years beyond that. And I think that goes to the maintenance crew that we have. They're very good at keeping things up to speed and in a usable state, that when we do need it, we need it. So that's one of the things I wanted to get out. And on some of the bigger equipment, you do have options from, do you just outright replace it? Do you refurbish it? Or do you buy used? We've done all of that in the past to keep our fleet. Again, it goes to how much do we use it? How many departments use it, things of that nature. And I do have the specific ones, but I won't go into the details other than maybe just that extreme case. We have other equipment, for instance, our street sweepers. They're on a 6-year schedule replacement. We want to replace them at 6 years. Very high wear, high maintenance, very expensive pieces of equipment. And again, we've tried extending those into the 7-8 years. A couple times it bit us on drive motors, some other major large capital items, and then a lot of downtime for lead time for parts. So that's just kind of some of the stuff we want to reach out. One of the things that we need to keep in mind, there are times that we program or recommend replacement of equipment, and then on the finance side, as Phil discussed, the funding isn't available. So at that point, we have to weigh, what do we think it's going to cost us? Are we going to have major repairs? And there are times that we do encounter multi-thousand, tens of thousands, in fact, maintenance. The one that has been discussed in depth would be for the fire department, for instance, rolls back to the capital investment. We're looking at one fire truck in particular that currently in August has 123,000 miles still in use. And I put in front of you, if you look at the different stuff, what we typically drive these vehicles. If you look at second page, number 320, you can see they average, anywhere from 6,000 to 9,000 is probably average per year, I suppose, depending on the number of calls, fire calls. But again, on a truck like that, and this is the point that I wanted to make, was if it takes nearly a year to come up with specifications and manufacturers, and in another year to build, we're looking 2 years from now. So that's something as the fleet, we want to say, wow, 2 years, what's that going to cost us to keep that piece of equipment? That's one side of the equation. The other side of that hurdle is Kayla's and Phil. How do we fund that? I mean, that's a major capital item. Typically, it's a separate CIP bond issue, as it was on their last truck. I don't remember if it was a 5-year bond or what we went into. Those are separate major capital improvements that council typically approves, and you don't escrow. And that rolls back into another point. For road use, for the sewer fund, we actually have in an escrow account, we estimate what our replacement cost, and then through the finance department, they do actually put money in that account to where that money's available when we replace it. Not all departments have that funding stream where they can do that. Again, that's a balancing act, a real juggling act for the finance department to keep that solvent and keep those funds in line. And again, each department is different. That's something that these two can maybe inform you better on as that develops. I guess I'd open it up. Again, we've done this PowerPoint presentation before. I guess, is there any specific questions? I do want to just make sure that people understand, a lot of times if we have a piece of equipment that has a 10-year replacement schedule, it's not uncommon year after year to push it out and get 15 or 17 years, because one of the things that our guys are really good at, and I think the fleet as a whole, is to maximize our investment and get maximum useful life out of the equipment. One of the things again, and I said this last time, that the fleet acts as, in some instances, is to make sure it is equipment we need. It's not being replaced because somebody has a preference for a John Deere versus a New Holland. We want to make sure we take that completely out of the equation, and we do. I think we have enough professional staff that attends these meetings. I've got 4 or 5 guys that's been in maintenance in some capacity most of their life. They're very good. Unfortunately, the guys that speak out usually are also the target when you have other departments that want equipment that, would you like to have it? Yes. Do you need it? No. So that's part of our duty. We're kind of a crossing guard in a sense. Do you have specific questions? I know that.
Just out of curiosity, out of the entire fleet of vehicles that we have, what percentage of them, if you had to guess, is it like the last third of its life cycle?
Yeah, I wouldn't know without going through. We have so many pieces of equipment that fall under the fleet, and then pieces of equipment that's outside that also are maintained. I'd have to go through and look. I do actually have that in a spreadsheet form. We could come up with that statistic.
That would be interesting to know, I think.
And the other part, the framework here is really good, and it's something that I was utilizing in my prior community for vehicles, for facilities and otherwise, is getting that point where we're setting those dollars aside. And in one year, you might spend a couple $100,000, and the next year you might have to spend $800,000. If you're able to level that out, which is where this program kind of allows you to do that, so now you get 2 and 8, that's $1 million. If you could have 500,000 each of those years, so you're only spending 2 the first year, you got 300,000 you're carrying forward. Put the other 500 in, and now you got the 8. So some of those vehicles are going to need to be replaced right away. Others may not for a long time. And I'm throwing out fictitious numbers here, but there's probably somewhere in there. You're probably talking about numbers similar to that, 5 to 800,000, depending on the year, especially the type of vehicles. Now, a larger purchase like a fire truck, especially a vehicle that is going to last 20 years. You can look at bonding that out over a 20-year period, and it's going to be, that's the pay-as-you-use it type model. So the future taxpayers, the ones that are getting the benefit of that vehicle, the fire truck, are the ones that are paying for it through the debt service levy. The other method, the pay-as-you-go, is looking at setting the dollars aside and then purchasing it when you have that. And so there's no right or wrong way to do it. And usually there's some kind of blend to it, which is I think what we've been doing here locally. And that's really just trying to help the taxpayers overall. The downside, obviously, of debt service, the interest rate. You're paying the interest on it. And that's one of those things that we just have to do as a policy decision.
Yeah, and I guess the only reason that I asked the question that I asked is because if we do have, obviously I'm going to guess that these fire trucks are probably the more expensive items on that list, or at least right up there at the top of it. And
They'd be the most expensive.
If we had a lot of stuff coming up in the next 3-4 years on top of these, what's the potential impact that we're going to have a couple of years down the road when we actually go to financing these vehicles?
And again, probably the major difference on the fire department's equipment versus like the streets or the sewers in particular, we actually do escrow and have an escrow balance. So we actually program in, and when we extend the useful life of a vehicle, you technically could reduce your annual investment for that particular numbered vehicle. And again, that's the magic of the finance department to keep that balanced. So like in our department, we have a couple vehicles that are probably 340,000, and then a lot of them that's 150 to 170, where if you look at the new prices, you guys were involved, I think some of you involved in the purchase of their last one. It was approximately 1.3 million. Some of these new pumper trucks was originally, I think we had budgeted at 550, are probably trending more to 700,000. So they are very expensive and have almost always been just a standalone CIP type funding instead of trying to escrow out of their budget, if that makes sense. I do want to make a point. I don't want to make it sound like every vehicle we have that's programmed for 10 years is extended to 17. We've had different vehicles that we bought that had so much maintenance that they actually might have left the fleet at 8 years. because that's another thing that we look at is what is the trend of your maintenance out of service cycle. I mean, there's several things that we have to consider. If you have a piece of equipment and it's in the shop 3 months out of the year, now that's a hardship on the department, depending on how you have to backfill for that piece of equipment. So there's a lot of moving parts that we use to analyze our fleet and to keep it current and figure out what we want to do. Now, again, I've got a lot of really good experienced mechanics. They've come in and they know what is high maintenance type. It might be type of engine, might be type of transmissions. We stay away from those. And that's where it's very important for the maintenance guys to be involved in the specifications because they know what it takes. You know, it might have shiny whistles and bells on it, but if it's not something that's easily maintainable, then we really don't want it in the fleet. And the other thing that sometimes is lost in time, we've cut several people from our staff. And one of the reasons we were able to do that is we've continued to improve our fleet. I know when I started, this fleet program was relatively new. It was 6 years in the making. We had trucks that literally had holes in the floor, and it was a very good program. The original city administrator set this up, and it is just as sound today as it was when he set it up. So this is one of the programs that we need to keep set up as it is because it works so well. And there's always, tugs and pulls of trying to get us outside the rails, but we keep it in.
So, and I know that this is a question that the councilperson Stevens had asked probably every year when we went through the capital process. And knowing that we've reduced staff here or there across departments, do we have a lot of vehicles that are sitting around idle at this point?
There are some. I know what Skip was referring to was where, and each department needs to justify that. And I believe at the time, the chief at that time had come in and talked about, we're not utilizing this. We do have that internally. We've looked at stuff, and stuff that has not been used went to the auction. We'll usually pick the worst condition and we don't keep it on just to maintain it. So yes, we try to, and that's part of the fleet, only maintain the stuff and keep within the fleet the size of fleet and the equipment we need.
Okay. So I would assume that encompasses underutilized vehicles as well, maybe consolidating some of the routes, drive vehicles for vehicles that maybe aren't getting used as much as they should be.
That has come up multiple times over the years. I won't name specific departments, but if they have a vehicle that all of a sudden it was only driven 300 miles, then an entire year, then they need to look at one of the holdbacks that we have until auction time at Central Garage and utilize it. And that becomes more of a management decision.
So if I may, and Matt, I don't mean to jump ahead of you or Skip, so go ahead and then I'll.
I'm good. I have nothing. Go ahead.
Go ahead, I'll
I'm
wait.
just listening.
Okay, well, thank you. But so you mentioned several things in your presentation, Larry, and accountability struck me. And I know when you mentioned that as a fleet committee, you look at whether to purchase new or used. And I'm pretty sure, if not one of the big sewer trucks, maybe both, that you have in the past been able to buy off the good equipment, but buy it on a used basis instead of new. One thing that concerns me, and I had a really good chat yesterday with Fire Chief Miller, but I seem to say things that make it appear that I'm not supportive of our fire department. So I want to clarify. I'll just say, I think we have an excellent fire department, and I think they do an excellent job, and we're very proud of them. However, when you're talking about a new truck again, and I'll go back to the term accountability, it does concern me that we philosophically several years ago went with the idea of the two smaller trucks to take the big miles off of the bigger trucks. So now I know that we, the city, have had to cut firemen so they can't man the little trucks and go on a call and be short-term for the bigger truck back at the fire station kind of thing. I understand that. But I also think
from memory, that maybe we weren't using the smaller trucks prior to that time too, maybe to our to our credit as we should. So I just want to say, as far as accountability, and we purchase, and I've heard, maybe we're not talking about one new truck, maybe within a short period of time, we're talking about two or whatever. But we've got to get to the accountability. We've got a ambulance service in this town that pays $1 million in property tax a year. And while if it's a call for me, I hope everybody gets there. But at the same time, seriously, it's like if we can't afford to send big fire trucks on every medical call, then we've got to be accountable for that. We've got to work out a system so that if they have a way of identifying it as a clear emergency or whatever, use them. But otherwise, we just can't run them all the time, I think. So, and that was it, I guess. Accountability, new or used, and you spoke to that.
Right, and I think that's two different deals. The accountability in here, I don't think we go to the operations of individual departments. You know, that would probably be a separate work session item on with Tony, because I don't know exactly how that part of the system works when it comes to medical calls, what's required for fire calls. That's really not what the fleet committee or the people that's involved with the decisions within the fleet.
And excuse me, Larry, I do understand that. But at the same time, it does involve accountability, even for the fleet committee, when we're overusing equipment that could be used better, I think, personally. But thank you. That's good.
Go ahead, Skip.
I have one question, and I don't know who's to answer this. Rumor is that you think you've thought about eliminating the fleet committee. Is that a true?
No, I've never heard that. We've had some members that get upset at different times that usually get over it.
Okay, and one other, just a comment. I've noticed in the past that there's been some equipment sold that I personally thought we should have kept. It was used very little, but it was used or could be used in case of a tornado or a windstorm, would be used a lot then. Does the fleet committee look at equipment that's going to be sold?
We do. We try to look at and figure, does it fit in another department? We have several pieces of equipment that we've held back and said we're not selling, even though the department wanted to sell it because the replacement cost was in the $65,000 range. And honestly, other than a battery and clean the carb, you know, it's probably the oldest piece of equipment we've got in the fleet. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm pretty sure I know which one it is. I think it goes back to the mid 60s, and it's bulletproof as far as the way it's built. Very simplistic. Of course, the new ones have a lot more modern features, but when you base how many times we use it or what it costs to contract it, we have kept that back multiple times when it was suggested to be sold. And again, I think that's more discussions that we need to have when those are identified directly with the administrator, and maybe point out that, okay, perhaps this year we're not doing it, but are we going to next year? And what does it cost? At times we do actually do that.
I guess I would guess that there's been some equipment sold that the fleet committee didn't know about. And I would highly suggest that any equipment that someone's thinking about selling, it should come through you guys and you approve the sale, or
That might be a good practice.
I would think it would be. Thank you.
I'm just a comment and a quick question, Larry. There's no doubt in my mind after seeing some of our equipment that the fleet committee does a very good job at maximizing the use. So that has never been in question. I also think they're a very important part because I can see what can happen, you know, with a lot of different people and a lot of different wants. We have a lot of wants. We have a heck of a lot of needs. And I can see that the fleet committee kind of is, you know, impartial when it comes to certain departments and wants and makes the best decision based on strictly the needs. And I appreciate that. And I think it's definitely important we keep continuing with the fleet committee in any way we can. My question really is, the fleet committee, it seems, deals with current need, current vehicles and things like that. if a major policy change comes down from either staff and or the council on, say we take a department like the fire department and say, and I'm using them just as an example, this is in no way an intention to move on this, but as an example, say we wanted to restructure or change how they did their operations, same more with the parks. And the policy was to, well, we're not going to use the small trucks, kind of like Bob said, we're going to go to all big trucks and just use big trucks. Say that was just a policy change. Who would make that recommendation? Would that be a policy change that comes down through the staff, or is that something that would go through the fleet committee at some point? How do they assess the future needs of what, say, a policy to change a department and how they operate?
I would think the administrator would be involved with that and direct that. If it's council's decision to change that type of operation, then as part of the information that would be gathered and presented as what we believe the impact would be to do that type of policy change or operational change, I think we would be the supporting branch to provide what we think financially and impact on equipment would be. Not necessarily, the fleet would not take the role in how a department should operate, I don't believe.
It's outstanding. Well, again, the fleet committee does a wonderful job. I know they don't get the credit they deserve sometimes, and I know they get a little touchy when it comes to different things. So I appreciate what they do, and I think it's a very needed committee.
And again, we've got 4 or 5 members that are sometimes probably perceived to be outspoken, but they take their job serious. They've got really good background. Several of them run, large fleets for other companies also before they come to us. And they're more than willing to speak what they believe is true. It would be like we would not go to council or would not probably recommend approval of maybe Rubicon Jeeps for an inspection or office staff. We think that that's just too much expense.
I would recommend
a 150, an F-150 or a WT.
Right.
Jeeps are very expensive, and I just wouldn't recommend
I think
them
they hold
for
up very
general
well
use.
either, it seems to be. So I appreciate that insight, Larry. Thank you.
I think council probably hasn't had the opportunity, but I know Phil and I both have attended the fleet committee meetings. Dan Crossman, our chief mechanic, does a great job in terms of evaluating the equipment. Kelly Blankenship, I think, is an
True.
unspoken hero. She really keeps great records, and she knows that equipment, and she is an administrative assistant, but she keeps the committee on target. So having watched this a couple of different times now, I think the committee meets the purposes that it's set up to do, to be fiscally responsible and not to waste money in terms of repairing something over and over and over if it's a lemon, to use that term. But it is a difficult because everybody has their own personal values, and I think the committee kind of looks at what we can afford, what we need, and how much is it used. And I think the council should feel good that the committee is serving a purpose that really is beneficial to the entire community.
So I just wanted to thank Larry for the presentation there and to shedding light on how that process works. I think it really is a good model as far as looking at how we can approach it with other aspects of the capital infrastructure as well. One thing I just wanted to point out as far as with that funding is dollars are coming out of operating going into that fleet. And so there is some of that funding is being established and set aside. And so if you're setting aside $50, $70, $100,000 in the law enforcement budget, let's say, to go into fleet for the purchase of squads and things, that it is money that's being offset on that operating. So those are some of the funding things of looking at big picture, how we want to continue to do that, because that does impact that $8.10 there. The other thing, though, too, I just wanted to point out is, the fleet is definitely one aspect, but we have a number of other things that projects and other infrastructure that we need to keep in mind as well. And some of the things that go into, at least when I'm looking at some of the capital requests, are that priority level. Is it something that is a critical need, something that is needed right now? It's a life and safety issue. It's satisfying some legal obligation. It's alleviating emergency service or disruption. those are critical items. Those are ones that we want to address in a given year, kind of to Councilman Rowe's point. Where are things on the schedule with vehicles and some of that parts that wear out? It's a little bit easier to tell those things. When you get some of the outside the community or economic development projects that come forward, it's not always easy to tell the importance of those. And a lot of times those get shoved to the corner because we need to replace the fire truck or the police squad or road infrastructure, whatever it might be. And some other projects may get pushed aside. Also projects that are very important, something that might stimulate economic growth or private capital investment, reduce future operating and maintenance costs. So a vehicle doesn't necessarily need to be replaced, but it's starting to, and this is where fleet does a great job, I think, of saying, hey, yeah, this is starting to get to that point where we're right on the cusp. We're going to blow that engine if we keep operating it. So we want to replace it now and not have a $30,000 repair cost. We can get it for, I'll use one for 55 or whatever it might be.
And can I sum up a little bit of the fleet? So part of, to Phil's point on the relief of some of those vehicles or the general fund, some of that we've identified right now that we could give some relief to the general fund are those operating expenses that are going in to fleet. So for instance, if we could, instead of paying for that out of the operating expense, bond for it with our capital bond or with our CIP or debt service. Right now, just for FY21, we could give our general fund over a $300,000 relief for just this year on those operating expenses. And if we could do it, for FY21, FY22, and FY23, that gives us some capacity then in the general fund that we've not had. It's not a long-term solution, but it's a short-term solution for right now, so that way we can protect our general fund and the fund balance in our general fund. And some of that has been put off over the last couple of years, or that amount has been reduced out of certain departments to go into things like fleet, because we just haven't had the money in the general fund. And so therefore we've, gotten behind in, a couple vehicles or a couple other capital things that need to be done because the general fund didn't have the capacity for it. And how you give that relief then is to bond for it or to put that into your CIP.
Administrator Rath mentioned this earlier. How much capacity do we have at this point as far as lending capability before we hit that cap?
The
Like
legal
28
limit.
million is the legal debt margin that we have on per our FY19 audit. So, I mean, it's a lot. And of course, we wouldn't want to go there, but it's much more than what we're sitting at right now for an ask.
And just looking at what we, the process that we just went through with the budget for this year, and then looking forward into what we know we're probably going to have next year, it's a little bit worrisome. The ability to want to take a whole lot of risk is, at least for me personally, is something that I'd have to weigh pretty seriously, because we know that our property tax, we're already sitting at the cap right now for the general fund levy. We know that the property valuations aren't going up. So, and we've got our expenses going up 3, 4, 5% every year, with our human capital costs going up more than that every year. So it's a little bit concerning, even though we do have that $28 million that you're talking about for room, we're still going to have to pay that money back.
Yeah.
And that's a little bit tricky to negotiate.
And again, I think that's where, we kind of want some direction, and that's, again, where we have some capacity in reducing some of our other levies, then to reduce those levies to increase our debt service levy, with overall, taking our levy down, 10 cents is kind of what we're looking at right now, but we're still able to increase that debt service levy by decreasing some of those other levies.
If I could jump on to what Mark's hitting at too, and then Kayla, something you said in your presentation. And I'm just going to throw some things out here because I understand what you're saying, Phil, that this is just a work session and it was kind of narrow. But I want to throw a couple of things out there so that as you have, you develop your other thoughts toward budget or capital improvements, that at least me as an individual, I've thrown them out there. One of the things you said, Kayla was mentioning, and you spent some good time trying to explain these things to me yesterday, and I appreciate that. But usually our capital improvements have been 2 to 3 years, sometimes 5, and now we may be looking longer. And it does concern me, and you've tried to explain that money from the general fund, if we could make some changes right now, we could help the general fund quite a bit the next 2 or 3 years. But it does concern me that, yeah, you can do it now, but pay me now or pay me later kind of worries me. And then secondly, though, then my agreement of doing capital projects, it's like, and I think, Mayor, it's okay to say that JBS Corporation is working on funding some projects with the city, one of which is a major amount of money for new shower facilities and what at the park, Greater Ottumwa Park. So to me, if we, as you look at that capital improvement projects, if we could make sure to include whatever the JBS money would mean, if we needed some additional to add to make a really quality project, we do that. And then I want to just throw in how you figure all these other things out is the tennis courts, Mayor, and you've mentioned that they in working with the city and everything, how and when are we going to do something there? Skip, you mentioned also at the parks, they'd like to put in 12 additional pads and so forth. And then lastly, I'm curious, Babe Ruth was at a regular meeting just recently wanting to know how we can fund. I know we can't do it out of capital improvement money, but where in the budget, general fund, where do we figure that? So thank you for listening to me, but consider those things too, please.
Yeah, and that was kind of the point I was hitting on with other projects is there's other things that you go into. Is there funding sources, grants, donations, other things that play into that make a project viable in year 1 or next year versus year 2 or 5 or, so you have some things in mind as far as future capital projects that you're looking at. And depending on where those other things come into play, a shower house facility, the campground is probably one of the few money-making ventures, services that the city provides. So to be able to have that, the return on investment is going to be much quicker on something like that than other, a road. You're not going to see a return on investment in a time frame. As far as the bonding, that is exactly kind of why we wanted to have that conversation. If there is little to no appetite to bond for any amount of money or limited funds or whatever it might be, that's kind of what we need to know. So it will help direct what we're bringing forward as far as projects. We legally cannot bond outside of what the useful life of whatever the item is, so you're not going to be able to do a 20-year bond for a squad car. A squad car is going to be 5-6 years at most. If you're really nickel and diming it, I've seen a lot of places will rotate on a 4-year basis even because of the miles and everything on them. So, obviously, whatever we bring forward is going to be a recommendation that is going to be within those legal confines. And one of the things we're looking at, myself, and I believe I can speak for Kayla, is what kind of relief can we do for the taxpayers that we can still lower the tax levy, but also servicing the needs for the community. And so we are looking at all of those things. If we have the ability to put some of that debt service out into the future, and we can grow the tax base at the same time, that's going to help lower that overall tax burden on individuals. There's going to have to be some give and take. There's going to have to be some investment there as part of that. And the biggest thing we saw with the budget in March was we're up against our operating levy for the general fund. And there is no more room to grow there the way things are now. So if we can find some areas or ways to relieve that pressure, that'll give us the ability to further grow the rest of the city. The question came up on, lost my train of thought there completely. All services. We're looking at everything. You mentioned employee benefits and other things. That's a major part. More than it's $9 and whatever. We're one of the highest costing benefit cities in the state as far as the tax rate goes. And so, are we able to find any ways where we can help relieve some of that pressure? We're not going to do everything in 1 year, obviously. But if we can do, some in year one or even start working towards it, so year 2 or 3, being able to look at a plan that is 3 to 5 years out will help us in the long run on that. So it is looking at everything and trying to fit it all out. But we've got some costs that we have now that are going to need to be looking at in fiscal year 22, I guess it would be. So
Well, some of it's to give us some relief this year too.
that's true.
Just the general fund stuff.
Your Honor.
And I'll roll back in, sorry, Matt.
No, that's fine. Go
Into
ahead.
the fleet. There are certain vehicles that you can't really allow to break down in service. Police and fire are two of the services that you just can't have a truck break down toward a fire or emergency response or police responding. Our fleet, if we take a dump truck, for instance, and we push it back a couple years, we have had at times that we call Darren. That's the worst. We have to pay a tow bill to get it back to the shop. So, that goes to Phil's priority. You have to look at that when you're discussing that item and make sure that, of course, it's going to weigh heavier than some of the others. And again, you've got the bigger picture. I'm talking specifically fleet replacement at this point. And it's very similar. All our capitals, if you remember back in past years, we would present from the engineering side or from the public works side, all of the capital that has a match. And of course, when we were weighing, you got 50 cents on the dollar, that's going to move it up as you were just discussing. The problem is that leaves so many projects. You touched on it in the very beginning. If you've got something leaking, for instance, on a building and it's 25 grand, you're going to repair it before you have more substantial damage 5 years later. There are certain things. The problem is we run out of money way before we run out of projects. You guys have all been here for that scenario.
Yeah, and it seems like, and sorry, let me interject here real quick, and I'll just give a comment, because I want to ask a question here about what you're expecting of us as far as direction. But it really seems to me like we don't get much help from the state either. We just practiced, changed our way we do transit and freed up a lot of the levy, lowered taxes, lowered that levy, or will have lowered, that levy in its entirety here before too long. And yet we have no wiggle room on our general fund. We can't say, well, it'd be nice if the state would say, well, you lower taxes by 60 cents per thousand or 80 cents. You give the 60 cents to the taxpayer as tax relief. And then if you're having difficulties in other areas, which all cities struggle with their general fund and cap of 810, shift some of that over to the general fund just to provide some relief. Because you capture two things. You reduce taxes for the taxpayer, and you're able to fund and extend your life on some other levies that we all know are not near large enough to take care of what cities need. But down to my question is, so we had this work session. It's kind of narrow in scope, but yet I sense that the direction, I'm trying to get a good read on the direction staff is wanting us or wanting us to give you as far as your expectations. Are you saying you want to start shifting how we, extract the operating expenses out and CIP those in the future? Or are you looking for us to say, oh, yeah, well, how much do you want to bond? It's hard to say how much we would be willing to increase when we don't really know what the plan is. Is there going to be a plan forthcoming, or is this just informational or getting us ready for some kind of thing, or how are we looking there?
It's a little bit of both, but you hit on one of the topics there. I guess a general question that I had. The council and the city were fortunate with having a partner in 1015 and being able to operate. And as you had mentioned, going forward, we're going to be able to reduce that transit levy. The question is there any potential or appetite to take a portion of that, still lowering the overall levy, but saying we can't put it into general fund, but using that to kind of help offset debt service payments so that it's still an overall reduction to the citizens, but not, and being able to borrow, bonds for some, and using some of that levy to kind of increase the debt service by an offsetting amount. That was one of the questions on if there was some appetite there for that.
I guess my take, and then I'll be quiet, is whenever, we have a duty to the taxpayer to make sure that they can afford to survive. And we have high tax rates, and we know why we have the high tax levy, because we have, dilapidated infrastructure, a lot of needs, and not enough money. It just seems to me, in my opinion, that when you lower a levy, some of that should be given as tax relief. That fits one whole purpose. Separate from that one whole purpose is you have freed up your own, the people's money that has been coming in for a purpose and reformulating that to another purpose. That is not increasing the amount you spend. It is just repurposing or redirecting that. I would be in full support of that, much more than raising the levy and raising taxes on everybody who can hardly afford to pay them as they are. So if we can work that kind of plan out, when we're not spending more and giving tax relief, man, I think you hit on the perfect solution that most governments try to look for. So you would have my support on how long we stay within those confines. That would be, and I'd like to see some significant tax relief too. I mean, we say we're going to do something, and if we claw it all back and spend it, that's not responsible either. So I think we can, if we do it right, I think there's a way to do it, for everybody. Absolutely.
And I sure agree with Matt. In fact, Matt, on my list that I didn't mention, the first thing was reducing property tax, and not reduce it and then raise it somewhere else. But I like what you're saying. Look at that transit levy maybe and make things work.
Yeah, and that was one of the things that I want to just see. We're not asking for any final solutions or committing you to anything tonight. Just, it doesn't make sense to work out a plan or an option to say, here's what it looks like if it's going to be a non-starter. And so that was kind of the question. Is there an ability to look at that? And then we can put some numbers together, find out what the availability of bonding might be on that, and coming up with some real things. We still want to make sure that we're providing a discount or a break on that. That was one of the big things that was brought forward with the joint services. And so we don't want to lose sight of that. And I think at the same time with the budget, I'd mentioned there are some other revenue options that are available to the city, namely franchise fees and things like that. To the point, and I think I made this statement, I agree that we don't want to just pile on. We don't want to take our in my opinion, we don't want to take the current tax levy, pile on franchise fees on top of that, and now so if we're able to use the franchise fees to help support the general fund, we have to find a way to offset that in a meaningful way so that there's a net zero at worst for the taxpayers.
I'd
That's
just
my
make a
opinion.
comment too, that I think this is all preliminary because we're November 14th doing a half-day retreat to talk about projects, future directions, and I think that will help us too to finalize where we're going as a city, because we can look at department-wise, but we've got some other projects like the levy, which we are going to have to bond for.
Right.
And that's not any one department, that's a city function. It's safety and protection. There are some others like that. So I think we just want to be thinking through what are the options, and a question that came up, and I was talking with somebody outside of the city recently. Do we have any policy about when does a project, is there a certain dollar amount that it comes to the council? Even if it's in the general fund, emergencies come up and we buy things or we get things, and people always say, well, you get this when you need it. Well, is there a policy about that? Do we have a written policy that if it's over X dollars, it comes to the city council first before we go ahead and make that decision?
Individual department heads have a limit of $5,000. The policy was put in place between, it would be for the administrator and the finance director of both signatures. It's $10,000. So we have a purchasing policy.
Okay, I understand that, but I'm thinking we've recently purchased some equipment that everybody likes and wants and needs, but we spent $80,000 on a camera system, for example. And is that something that we should have thought through and said, we'll postpone that or get that next year? Is there a decision about if it gets over, I'll just pull this out of the air, $50,000. If it's over 50,000, the administrator and finance department present a plan to the council so that we don't just react to things because we need it. And then I'm thinking you're in a unique position. If we have a problem at the water treatment facility, you have to do it. And you've got funds to do it because they're isolated. But if it's general fund money, we find a way to somehow squeeze it out. And I think the comment about, are we going to support the World Series this year? That's $25,000 that's the amount they mentioned.
Yeah.
We can decide anything. But we don't have that budgeted this year. So, and that'll come out of, well, it could come out of 2 different fiscal years, actually.
Yeah, it's
so-
actually next fiscal year.
Yeah.
Yeah, if it's next fiscal year, we obviously have the ability to budget for that.
Right. That's good.
At this point,
Yeah.
but
Your Honor, that's kind of
But
what
I
I was
think-
talking about there before. And I'm sorry, Mark, you touched on there. It's like the decisions on priorities and what we spend money on should be a decision that involves staff and council. It shouldn't be just a move by staff. We need to know why or your justification, because ultimately we're in charge of the budget, whether it fails, for the people or it works well for the people. So whether that decision squarely falls on us or staff and council combination, or staff presents to council, council approves, there needs to be more input or at least information given to the council, I think, for those types of decisions the mayor was talking about, because all of a sudden we can't, we come at the end of the year and council saying, well, we need, personnel, or we need this, we look at this through the budget, and well, we don't have the money, but we don't know what all's been purchased sometimes if we're not given that, in an easy to read format, not just the, monthly expenditures. That's, just something that sums it all up. So I think a policy like what he's talking about might be something we need to look at. I would fully support
Well, and I think
any of that regulation on our funds.
we also need to take a look at what we've completed this year too, because a lot of the projects that we previously funded through CIP are going to drop off. And I think of the airport runway, for example, that's one, or streetscape is another. There may be some other ones.
Well, each year, we prepare through our department anyway on our infrastructure type, a 5-year plan with 2 years typically funded. So, that's a rolling schedule that, of course, as needs come up, failures happen, they might change in the last 3 years. And then when 2 years is up, or even the first year, you add on another one, even though they're not funded yet. There's still a 5-year ongoing for our type of CIP projects.
Yeah.
Now, I do want to add a little bit to your emergency repairs. I would inform the administrator immediately if we have a failure that is causing some sort of, let's say, sewer discharge, because we have to act immediately. We can't sit and wait and go through the bidding process. The normal public bidding process is set aside when you have an emergency like that. And you are correct. We do have the sewer fund balance, and we have a road use fund balance that we can dip into, which is quite different than the general fund. My understanding, council does have to approve those, and it would be addition by subtraction from your budget. If you want to add 50,000 and something else is going to be delayed until the next budget cycle. I think Phil probably has a better way to phrase that, but that's.
And I just to piggyback off of what Matt had said, and I think this goes back to the comment that I made earlier, talking about being a little bit risk averse when we look at some of these capital projects and how we're utilizing general fund money going down 3, 4, 5 years. And this has been a consistent theme, at least since I've been on council for the last 4.5 years. Every year we have unbudgeted items that come up, and usually, this Babe Ruth is a prime example of that. Every year we get these $25,000, $50,000 asks, and we've got to try to, and again, we have all of this money that we're being reduced every year because of state rollbacks, whatever, property devaluation, and then we keep getting all these things, and the question rarely gets asked, okay, what's going to get cut? We got $25,000 that they want. We really want to fund it because it's really good for the city. What are we going to cut to get rid of it? And unfortunately, the one thing that we can cut, in theory, is human capital. But we can't do that because most of those people are under contract. Most of the things that we're paying for are under contract, so we can't cut that. So that's where I'm saying, I would be a little bit more risk averse going down, a $15 million bonding over the next few years when we know we're going to have these unannounced costs. I mean, I know right now we've got a bunch of groups that are going to come asking for money. Now, whether they get it or not is a completely different thing. But the fact of the matter is there's going to be the ask, and there's going to be this is going to benefit the city of Ottumwa. We've got to do it. Okay, so what's going to get cut in return? And nobody likes to hear that. And we've said that here in public. What are we going to cut? And the response has been in the past, well, we've got nothing that we can cut. Okay, so then we can't fund this. Well, nobody likes that response either. So I think that as we look at this capital, we also need to be willing as a council and as staff to take a stand and say, this is what we have available. And if anybody comes and asks for anything, something's got to go in turn.
Yeah, and I think that's why our fund balance has been going down among other reasons. But you're right. I mean, there hasn't been anything to cut except for personnel and or we haven't funded the fleet, or we've cut the amount that we're funding fleet for our general fund departments, and we can't sustain that. And that's why we need some relief right now. And
unfortunately, we've seen that, with the beach over the last, probably 10 years. It's cost us way more money to fix the thing and get it back up and running because nobody wanted to fund the repairs to begin with. It probably would have cost half of what it actually cost us in the end.
Absolutely.
And that's the major risk of pushing back capital investment, and why we're kind of looking at, say, okay, where do we go from here, and how do we look at that? And there's obviously the cost of the human capital element too. When we lose staff, we're losing the ability to do functionality services at the same level we were doing them before. And so it's having to trade off at that point as well. And that was one of the reasons why we're currently in the midst of working out and developing that priority-based budgeting, is to help identify some of those key things. And when we have that last-minute ask or whatever it is, to say, okay, can we look at, is there somewhere we can do this, and have a little bit more of a trade-off option for council to explore.
And Mark, I want to just touch back, and I think that's probably where I hear the most comments from the general public to me. I think they get confused on different buckets of money that have specific legal uses.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't know how many times that even internally or city employees will see fund balances, and it's like, yeah, there is a fund balance. That's your tag for sewer. Oh, there is. That's for road. I don't get to take road use money or sewer fund and build a ball diamond. I mean, there's specific uses that come out of the general fund, and you're exactly right. A lot of times that bucket's empty just from your operational expenses, and that will be a balancing act.
And Mark, if I could, once again, I'll try to defend, having been on the council 10 years ago. What you've said and what Matt has said is exactly the problem. And I think you two have now seen it firsthand in this last 2 years. But the beach is a perfect example, Mark. I was on a council that we knew this needed to be replaced over there. We knew that replaced over there. And yet every time we came for money to do it, there was never any money. So I like the mayor's idea. I like this emergency fund. I like our budget, where we have got to learn to be able to say no. We can't afford it, or we can't do it. So, good point.
Yeah, I mean, and if you guys want to, set aside, a council or mayor's fund, then we need to do that during the budget cycle. Like, if we set aside 25,000, so that way, if you're going to have an ask that's going to come every year from, you just know it's going to happen, right? But you set that aside during the budget process of, we need to set this dollar amount aside for next year's budget in case somebody comes and gives us an ask.
I
instead
think that's a
of,
really good idea.
instead of adjusting the budget or cutting something else. But we've got to find a way to give it some relief so that way we can start making those sorts of adjustments to move forward.
I thought we did that. Did we not pass a resolution that regulated how we spend monies to groups who ask us without a direct economic impact?
I don't think it was to what she's talking about.
We
Yes,
just set a
did-
limit on it, or?
Yeah, we did that, but I think it wasn't for generalized items.
Right.
It was specific to events, if I remember correctly.
That's what I thought too. And this would be technically an event, would it not, the Babe Ruth? I mean, this would be an example of what an event ask would be.
Yeah, but I think to what Kayla's saying is if a community group comes and asks for sponsorship for funding for their organization, that would apply more to this than it would to an event thing.
It almost seems like we don't have near the money to start divvying up different ask buckets. It's almost like we have a certain amount of money. This is going to have to cover events. It's going to have to cover asks and charity. And whatever we do, it seems like we need to identify what that amount is, or if it's something the council can even agree on to fund, and then set that, and then that's it. That's all we got. I think we've tried to do, well, here's events, and here's other asks, and here's, money for things we don't expect that they might ask for, and then here's something else. I don't think we have the money to do that with. And I think this may be a hard no, or a reduced no, or an in-kind only contribution type thing that the city can do with staff at a certain time to maybe help the fields. But that's just an example. I know Skip had something he wanted to say, and I keep cutting him off.
No, that's all right. Yeah, I agree with what the mayor said. I think, and what Matt said, a lot of this boils down to communication. And I think communication's always been pretty poor here. So I think the council needs to be more in the know what's going on. Not that we're going to squelch it, just be in the know. Secondly, what I would like to see, this is a good detailed report on the fire trucks. I'd like to know from the fire department, I thought I heard that one of these trucks was sidelined. It couldn't be used. I'd like a report on exactly where they're at, and if it is sidelined and they're going to have to do something else right away, or it can wait, they can use it 2 more years or 1 year or whatever. Secondly, we've been talking a little bit about the parks. I think we need something to go by, not just operate on the seat of our pants. We need a game plan for the needs over there at the campground, so we can see them laid out in front of us and choose what we want to do sooner than later, what can wait a year or so. I know there's camping pad issues over there that we can put in, a new shower house that Gene's been talking about, trees that need to come out. We've had a camper totaled every year for the last 4 years over there, and 1 year, 2 of them. That's a big liability on the city. There's all kinds of things that could be done over there, but I'd like to see something, somebody lay out what their hopes are over there, and list those items so we can all look at those, look at the fire's needs and say, woo, this has got priority. This can wait a year or 2, whatever. And anybody that's going to donate money, I would think, would want to know how we're going to use it, not just what somebody says. Am I making sense, Larry?
Well, we do have, if you remember, it goes clear back to 2005 and 6, I believe, where they did a master plan for the parks. They went through and did quite a few citizen engagement, and they put a price tag to each of those items at that time. I think that might need to be brought forward and kept current. I don't know how much you've looked at it since that point, but it did list every possible project that was ever discussed by any group. And I think that thing needs to probably, in the way Phil's talking, probably into priority budgeting. You would look at that and you'd use that document to assist, because they're a living document. Things drop off, the interest falls, wanes, other items come up. And I think that needs to be kept up in order to do what you're discussing. The shower house is one of those items listed in that plan. And so I believe we're adding pads over time for drainage and just having a concrete pad for campers. I think that needs brought forth at a certain, maybe it's annual that's brought forth and updated in order for finance to plan. Because again, the parks money comes out of that same general fund as your public safety money. Short of, they do have revenue that comes back from camping. I might have an impatient daughter here.
I think you're right, and that map's probably so outdated now, but if you had that map, Gene or somebody could show where the 12 proposed camping spots would go.
Absolutely, it
where
could be
the new
updated.
shower house would go, and your guys have knowledge enough to know how to run the sewer line for full hookups, if that's a possibility,
Sure.
and all kinds of stuff, but it wouldn't take long to do that.
No, I just think that, that's something that needs to be rolled into a lot of the planning and stuff that has been done through the Legacy Foundation. There's a master plan. We need to make sure those two mesh. And I think annually it should be brought up. The finance is a separate issue. It's always going to be a struggle for anything that comes out of that general fund.
Yeah.
And then-
I personally, I'd just like to see a layout of what the needs are here so we can see them in black and white and prioritize them. You
Yeah,
mentioned priorities.
That's exactly what you're defining as a 5-year or 10-year capital improvement plan. You put that out there, you plan out for the next 5 years or so, or 10, depending on what you want to do. And every year it gets updated, the projects drop off, projects gets added. It helps identify, and that kind of plays back in. So 1 year a grant might be available, we apply for it. We get it, we are able to do the project because it's in the list. We know it's something that was planned for. Same thing with the roads and streets. You're looking at that. You're out 5-10 years or so. Now, that's going to change year to year. You may have a street planned for 1 year, but because of weatherization, freeze, thaw cycles, whatever else, one street becomes more priority than another, or it's a water main breaks up and down the thing that now prioritizes one street over another. It's going to happen, and there's going to be some flexibility, but having it in that schedule, people know it's coming up. It's not that
Right.
it's just getting forgotten and whatever else. So
Yeah, I'm very
And
familiar.
that fits in, I think, very nicely with our comprehensive plan too, that we just finished. We really need to be keeping that in front of us so that we look at our long-term goal as a city in view of the comprehensive plan. And then the capital improvement plan usually is a little shorter and would certainly address more immediate needs. But
Well, it helps with the financing aspect then too, of
Right.
knowing, where those funds are and, if it's park money, if it's road use tax, general fund, bonding, whatever it might be, helps to define where the finances are coming to pay for those projects.
because a couple of other things that we haven't even talked about, but, when you talk about funds coming out of general fund, what about economic development? Do we have money set aside for that this year? Technology, I know we've talked about that. There are a lot of very specific things that we really need to be thinking through and developing. I agree, Skip, we need a long-term plan. And that's why this retreat is so important, I think, when we sit down and talk about department heads and staff had a chance to make suggestions, and we have an individual that's a former city manager is going to be pulling all that together and feeding it back to us. So hopefully we'll get a better sense after we've had that retreat on the 14th. But I think this generates the interest to say to the staff, we have a lot of needs, and what's your appetite for how far do you want us to go this year to get that started? Because it's going to be a long-term process.
I want to go back and address the question that Skip had about the fire truck vehicles. I'm going to give you a quick rundown of what vehicles we have. We have a 1996 Pierce truck. 2 years ago, they did the annual ladder test on it. They did the annual ladder test. They took it out of service that day because it had rusted out so bad. We can still use the truck. We cannot use a ladder on the truck. There's nothing we can do about that unless the city wants to pay a tremendous amount of money to replace the ladder. We don't recommend doing that. The AFG grant that
Chief,
pardon?
could you remove the thing? Having trouble hearing you.
Okay. The AFG grant that was written 6 months ago, that's still out there. They have not decided yes or no on that yet, but it's still out there, which is good. We have a 2005 truck. We have a 2003 truck that have many, many miles on them. We have matching squads, 2010 matching squads. And at the time we bought these vehicles, because at the time it worked our department well. The game in the fire department has changed for the Ottumwa Fire Department. I don't know of any better way of putting that other than we had 10-person crews. Now we have 8-person crews. We have 6 people working, 3 at each station each day. We run medical calls. We're at 3,205 as of 10 o'clock this morning. We run medical calls, and there's a reason why we run medical calls, because we save a lot of lives every single year, and that's important. One thing I've talked to the finance director and the city administrator about is there's other ways we can get a fire truck, buy a demo fire truck. That would save the city a tremendous amount of money. I'm looking other ways. I've been writing grants, a lot of grants. I'm trying to save the city as much money as I can possibly save them. So it's not like we're just saying, hey, we need a fire truck and here's why we need a fire truck. We're trying to do all the best we can to save the city money.
Yeah, see, I don't think everybody knew that you couldn't use the ladder on that truck. But that's why I say we need something more, as far as I'm concerned, more detailed to look at so we can set priorities like Phil said.
I would be more than happy doing a report on every single fire truck that we have. But that truck's out of service. I mean, it's out of service. There's nothing we can do about it. The
Thank you.
1996 Bears.
Kayla, could I ask the question? One of the things that I've noticed in short tenure here is that we used to do a lot of bonding for very short periods of time. Could you address that in terms of what's the pros and cons of doing it long-term, short-term? And obviously that depends on interest rates and what's happening nationally too. So there's some things outside of your control too.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know exactly what the philosophy was before my time, but my assumption is they didn't want to pay, larger amount of interest, that kind of stuff. They wanted to pay the bonds off as quickly as possible, which none of us like debt. I don't want to report on debt every year. It's, a lot of work. But at this point, I think that we need to look at doing a longer bond. I'm not saying, to, do one for 20 years or anything like that, but, to give us some relief, to give us a little bit more capacity until we get, some of these other funds looked at and relief in our levy, that kind of stuff. We need to do this at this point. And, maybe it is 8 years, maybe, it's 10 years. I don't know. We don't have those pro formas and all those information yet to present, but, interest rates are lower right now than what we've ever seen in my career. And, it might be a good time to do some of that, to give us some relief and to get us caught up on, some of these vehicles that, we need for police or fire, or some of the capital improvements that we need to do for facilities and some other things.
One of the downsides with the shorter term loans is, yes, you are paying less in interest typically because you're paying off quicker, but you're also paying those finance costs that are compressed in a shorter amount of time instead of over a longer period. And so you're paying more every year in your per capita debt then versus if you were able to stretch it out. With the lower interest rates, it's a good time to look at trying to extend that out a little bit. That has, it doesn't place as much pressure year on year then. You do pay more in interest over the life of it, but that's, one of those trade-offs. So paying less per year versus more over time. If you're looking at a short-term loan, those are typically reserved for more emergency type things. Because you're paying, those extra financing costs and other things. That's the downside of it. The upside, obviously, it's less than the longer term in the interest rates.
Do you have any figure, and not, we're just in discussion tonight, so there's nothing, we're holding nobody to anything tonight. But do you have a ballpark figure that you're looking at for our CIP? Are we talking 5 million, 10 million? Are you talking?
I think what we're looking at right now to get us through the fiscal year 23 is up to about 9 million. That's what, has come in for, and some of that again includes some of those fleet purchases with, a fire truck at the $750,000 mark. A couple of the police vehicles and the equipment that go into those vehicles, which is, over $500,000 for those years. And then that also includes streets. If we, at the low end of the streets, if we stick to about the, up to about the $5 million mark over those couple years. Now, if we include, all the streets that are, on the listing, then, we're talking about $13.8 million. But again, we don't think it's realistic at this point to be able to even do, that long list of streets. And that's not really what we have done in the past either. But again, that's kind of the ballpark that we're looking at, anywhere between 8.5 and 9 million.
Is that net of any debt buy down that we have this year? Or is that exclusive of that?
Yes. It's, okay, so this is just the,
Should be new.
this is new CIP that needs to be, that has been turned in and looked at over the next couple of years.
And
Was you referring to the refinancing of some of the sewer funds?
I'm
Bonds
just
for the sewer
talking,
fund.
I'm just talking about, if we're going to be adding, $8.5 to $13 million, what are we actually paying off in the same amount of time? What's the net increase going to be, I guess is what I'm asking.
Oh, what's falling off in those 3 years?
Yeah.
I can get you that. We do know that there are a couple of things falling off, but I don't necessarily have those specified in here.
Kayla, does that increase in overall debt include, and I know we're just in the beginning phase of looking in to see how we can use levy money or reuse levy money or, reallocate it to some other need. Say that's a possibility. Does this $9 million increase include that in the calculation? Like some of this will be, in essence, new money, not new, but diverted from an old need to a new need. Is that included in how we would go about paying those bonds off too? Or is this, you saying we need $9 million and, we'll figure out the rest later if we can shift some of those levy dollars, levy cents over?
Right, some of that is shifting those levies.
Okay.
Reducing a couple of them, eliminating the transit levy, those types of things.
And when we know more, could you give us a breakdown of how much is going to be paid with that levy money versus maybe an increase in just CIP overall,
Yes.
and maybe an operating cost being extracted from the general fund, just a breakdown? That'd be great.
Yeah, so our goal based off of the conversation tonight and what I've heard at least is, we'll look at the possibility of what an issue like that might look like, but also within our current levy as far as paying that off.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of what I heard.
And like I said, I'm working on some pro formas, not just for debt service or general fund, but for our other funds as well. We had pro formas done last year for road use and sewer, so those are pretty up to date. But what does this mean for those other funds that we do have some debt in that we're transferring in to pay for some of the debt service? And I don't have all of that done. It's gonna, we're a little early in that stage this year. I know what our payments are going to be this year, but I'm not, I don't have worked out those details from all those other funds yet.
I still would really caution us to not look real long distance. I mean, if we go 6 or 7 years, everything that we've all mentioned up here, we're aware and we want you to lower the taxes. So where is the revenue going to come from? So we might get some immediate relief, but overall, it's like, how are you going to pay it back? So I hope we don't go out too far, but I'm sure you'll explain to us what you think is best.
I think the most we'll go out is 20 years. We'll avoid the 50 and 100-year debt service.
That's not the American way.
I guess there was some
30
humor there
years.
that went past me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, we're just 60 cents, that we could add to the debt service would be, $400,000 a year to help us pay for that debt. So, we play with numbers, get the performance in, and see what that actually truly means and how many years that takes us out. Does that take us out 6 years or does it take us out 8 years? And that's the detailed information that, we'll come back to you guys on.
So Phil, I'm not sure what you meant or said, but I want to go back to Skip's point. And part of what I'm hearing here is, we're going to create some revenues some other creative ways. And one of those might possibly be a franchise fee. I don't want to get into that right now, but I've heard franchise fee for a year, and yet I've yet to hear whether we've talked with John Deere, JBS, Ottumwa Regional, or any of the other big people as to highly taxed community already, and what would a franchise fee mean to them. So I'm just saying, I think we really have to be cautious of how much debt we get into.
Any other questions for Phil, Kayla? Any other comments that you want to make, or?
I'll just real quick I don't think it was a question necessarily. No, we have not talked to anyone. We haven't. I'm doing some research on that and what that means. We're talking with Alliant and, well, if you remember from our attorney review, that was one of the questions and looking at. And so we're still in the early stages of what that means and what the impact would be, to know what kind of conversation that is. But I agree 100%. You have to have those conversations with the large employers, with the general public, with the county. There's some trade-offs with all of that. And so what is that going to look like?
So we hope we've stimulated some thinking tonight and give you things to weigh and chew on. And as we get to our retreat, we'll refine that a little further, and then hopefully we'll come back because you'll be doing budget work between now and the first of the year. Is there anything else for the good of the cause? Any other issue that you want to bring to the attention of the council? Staff, anything, anybody?
I'll just say thank you to the council members for the candid conversation. I know it was kind of an overview, 30,000 foot level, but coming in fresh, it's kind of good just to get that context as to where things are and where your appetite is for any of those tough discussions. So thank you.
So with that, I would entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Second?
Thank you.
Councilmember Rowe?
Yes.
Councilmember Stevens?
Yes.
Councilmember Myers?
Yes.
Councilmember Dalby?
Yes.
6:57.
That's what I have.